Rights Institute is charged with the idea of taking the lessons from the past and transferring them to our future.
As stewards of history in the Birmingham movement, the BCRI houses incredible collections that show and document where the community has come from and how the Birmingham movement both came to be and was so successful.
For more than 25 years, the Institute has educated people about what happened here in the 60s, not just in Birmingham, but across our country. Civil rights and equality challenged today just as they were many decades ago. We are here to enlighten each generation about civil and human rights by exploring our common past and working together in the present to build a better future.
Through many educational offerings, we teach the idea that the changes in Birmingham, Alabama were not just because of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and Reverend Ralph Abernathy. A lot of these changes took place because of the youth in this city. And due to that, we have a mission to share with the youth of today what youth in their generations in the past have done. Through our Legacy Youth Leadership Program, we bring high school students from all over the Jefferson County area here to study this narrative and to serve as docents and ambassadors to the Civil Rights Institute. We have BCAP, which is the Birmingham Cultural Alliance Project, where we visit middle school students and we take them through this history and through this narrative so that they can prepare to understand their role in society. We have outreach programs that visit many schools and institutions to highlight the story of accomplishment, the story of overcoming, the story of a power and the movement that people in Birmingham were able to bring to bear to change not only the city, but the state, the nation, and the world.
By making it accessible to researchers and local students from middle, high, and university students, they're able to come in and see where we've been so that they can go and be better stewards of Birmingham and our present and then our future.
Thank you for joining us for this engaging virtual conversation series. We invite you to help us continue the work for civil rights through racial justice by becoming a member or donating to our work. You can find us on our social media platforms to stay connected with us. Thanks again for your support.
Juana Thompson, and I am the interim president and CEO at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. It is such an incredible opportunity to be with you tonight. One of the things that we wanted to do in response to the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial, as we know, which was ultimately about the death of George Floyd, the BCRI wanted to be sure that we were providing opportunities for our community here in Birmingham and across the world to really sit with the verdict, but also think about what led us to this moment, what led the organizers and the people on the ground in Minneapolis to this moment. But now that we've sort of sat with the verdict, what's the next step? What are the things that we should be thinking about as we move forward? As you know, the BCRI is committed to telling of our stories, to truth telling, to making sure that we have opportunities for us to ask hard questions and have courageous conversations. And in this very sensitive moment, in this very defining moment, we knew that we needed to bring voices to the table as we think about next steps as the Institute, but as we think about next steps in our place as we talk about human dignity and human rights. And so a couple of things that the Institute decided to do in light of everything was, number one, to host a community healing space. And we're really excited that we're going to be able to provide over 100 hours of mental health opportunities and mental health services to our community. We're also going to have a healing circle coming up in the next couple of weeks, so please be looking out for that. And then we are going to follow up with all of that with the organizer training that we're going to launch during our Juneteenth programming, which will allow individuals who've been sitting with the results of this verdict, who've been sitting with all of the things that have happened since 2020, who've been sitting with trying to figure out what is the next step. How do I get organized? How do I, make some good trouble, as our John Lewis would have said. And so we want to be sure that we're not just thinking about this moment that we're currently in, but that we're thinking about next steps. And so as we look at the response to that, the very first thing that I thought is, what would it be like to have firsthand account of an organizer that I know personally and professionally that has been on the ground in the area in Minneapolis, who can share with us just a firsthand account of what has led to this moment. As you all know, this doesn't just happen. There's a lot of things that led to a moment of even a George Floyd, his life being taken in that way. We know that Philando Castile and others have been who were murdered at the supposed hand of the police, and things of that nature have happened in this same community, and yet justice to many was not served. And so what we're thinking about is, okay, how do we talk about these conversations? What was the organizing that happened prior to George Floyd? What was the organizing that had to happen in order to bring the attention to this case that organizers on the ground felt was incredibly important? And what are they thinking about now, and how can we support that? And so it is my honor to bring to the conversation Miss Leslie Redmond. She is the founder of Don't Complain, Activate. She is also the immediate past president of the Minnesota or Minneapolis NAACP branch there. She has been organizing, I don't know, Leslie, got to be what, 10, 15 years, if not even, if longer than that. And altogether, she has a JD. She is a Black woman who is unapologetic about her pursuit of organizing and for making sure that we have safe spaces and that we lift up communities that are most closest to the pain. And so it is my honor to share this BCRI platform with you, Leslie. Thank you for being here tonight. I know it's a lot going on the ground, sis. Please just, tell us a little bit about your background before we jump in, and anything that you want us to know that helps us to situate ourselves in this moment.
Grace and peace, Queen. Grace and peace, everyone. First, I just want to say how much of an honor and privilege it is to be here today. I've actually never been to Birmingham, which is just such a shame. So I have to come and visit you all at the Institute pretty soon. Grace and peace again, everyone. Leslie E. Redmond. I'm originally from the inner city of Washington, D.C., born and raised. I started to activate at the age of 17 when I was a senior in high school. We were protesting Michelle Reed. Many of you saw her on Oprah and a number of other outlets. She was the chancellor in D.C., and we were protesting her for a reduction in force, where she fired a lot of qualified Black teachers who were unionized and who she couldn't have fired for other ways. And so they used the reduction in force and financial ways to get those Black teachers out. So that was in 2009 going into 2010, so over a decade ago. Then I moved to Miami, where I studied political science, minored in African studies. During that time, I got very involved with voter activation. I had the chance to have lunch with President Barack Obama. I was a student body president. I activated a lot of, young people. And I was also there when Trayvon Martin was murdered. And so being a political science major, having to learn about the politics behind staying your ground during a time where Black people's lives do not even matter in America was very traumatizing. And I remember marching and protesting in the street. And I remember so many people, both Black and white, during that 2012 period was telling us to get out of the street, right? And moved to Minnesota in 2014 to pursue my JD MBA at the University of St. Thomas. And we know 2014, I think I moved there like a month after Mike Brown was murdered in Ferguson. And I remember one of my law professors, Nikema Levy Armstrong, who many of you maybe have seen, she actually went to Ferguson. And then that following year, I had just received an award from the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers. And it was the night that I met Miss Rose McGee, who was the wife of William B. McGee before he passed away. And he was the teacher and mentor of Attorney General Keith Ellison, right? Just a legendary attorney here in the Twin Cities. And so I was getting an award in his name. And then that following morning, Nikema Levy Armstrong sent a text to our committee, or basically we were part of her clinic, the Community Justice Project, saying that an unarmed Black man had been murdered in North Minneapolis. That was Jamar Clark. Many of you may have heard about when we occupied the 4th precinct for 18 days. And so when we showed up that morning, you know, no one was on the scene. The water was still there that they used to get up his blood on the scene, right? We interviewed firsthand witnesses because we know that the police was not doing that, right? Nakeem was able to call on the media. I remember going to church at Shiloh Temple International Ministries. This was the same location where Dante Wright funeral just was, also the place that Jamar Clark funeral was back in 2015. I went to church, came back, and the 4th precinct was completely full of people, right? So I was there every day for 18 days. And during that time, I was still a law school student. I still had to go to school. I would come right back to the 4th precinct after school. I was writing papers there. I was there, one of the few people who were there the night where the white supremacists came and shot about 6 peaceful protesters, right? And I remember that night so well. That was like my first national interview I did on Democracy Now!, basically telling the story of what happened and how we really were not protected, and the police did not protect us that night either. And so why this is so important is because when we talk about Brother George Floyd and what happened in 2020, we have to talk about what happened in 2015.
That's right.
Right? Because this was the fall before Philando Castile. Right? Now, you all know Philando Castile. I love Miss Valerie Castile. Hey, Miss Valerie, if you out there, the mom of Philando. So, you know, that was when we made a lot of noise. A lot of, you know, council members lost their seat. Some of you know about Andrea Jenkins. Some of you might know about Jeremiah Ellison, who was the son of Attorney General Keith Ellison. Also Philippe Cunningham. We got a lot of Black representatives in because when we were protesting, I remember testifying in city council about what I saw on the ground and telling those council members, if you all don't do the right thing by Black people, we will take your seats. And that's exactly what happened. The mayor didn't get reelected. Council members didn't get put in place again. And then, you know, we had Philando in St. Paul. Then we had a situation that didn't go national. His name was Thurman Blevins. And then you all probably remember when Justine Damon happened, right? This is the white woman. She was killed by a Black Somali Muslim man, Officer Noor, who was the first officer in modern history to be held accountable for killing a civilian, right? And that was a huge moment nationally. And that was when I was the vice president. So I hadn't become the president yet when Jamar Clark happened. I think I was the education chair for the NAACP at that time. And so, like you said, nothing happens overnight, right? This has been a progression. And when Justine Damon happened, that's when the previous police chief got fired, right? And that's when Chief Arredondo, our first African-American police chief in the history of Minneapolis, was positioned to get elected because of all the work that has been done on the ground. So what I tell people is Attorney General Keith Ellison is the first African-American Attorney General in the state of Minnesota, right? We have Chief Arredondo, who's the first Black police chief. Even Attorney General Keith Ellison was only on the case because of the advocacy of local organizers saying, Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman is not positioned to take this case. He doesn't hold police officers accountable. And the only one that he's ever held accountable has been a Black Somali Muslim man, right? So I know that that was kind of like a long timeline.
No, I think it's important.
Context.
No, I think that the context is important because I think a lot of people, when they when something happens, when we saw, George Floyd, or when we saw Breonna Taylor, a lot of people felt like, oh, people are getting in the streets for one person. It's like, no, actually, it's been a culmination of things that bring people to a certain activation point, right? Not everybody gets activated at the same moment, but I do think it's important to know that people have been activated around these issues for a very long time. And I think what made the George Floyd moment go as viral as it did, in my opinion, is the presence of technology that a lot of these cases before that did not have. Now, you had, body cams and different things like that, but even in watching some of the testimony, a lot of what was able to, in my opinion, illuminate the mind around what actually happened were these third, angle, or the different videos that civilians, had taken, the young lady had taken. And so, I think that it's really important, though, to know that you just said that the first Black attorney general, you just said the first Black police chief, you said that the work that people have been doing on the ground for at least the last 7 to 8 years positioned individuals who could be inside the system while you have people activated on the ground who are pushing public opinion and public appeal. All of that is required, if nothing else, to create a space where justice is possible, because we also know that justice doesn't always happen, right? And so I think that all of that is incredibly important. I would be remiss.
Can I just add on something?
Yes.
Because it's all very true, and I know that you are God-fearing women just as I am, and all of this was very divine.
Yeah.
Even me ending up in Minnesota, I accidentally applied to St. Thomas Law School. People think it's the craziest thing. I think it's the craziest thing because I knew nothing about Minnesota before I came here, and had St. Thomas not offered me that scholarship, I wouldn't have ended up here. Nakima was born in Mississippi, grew up in California, came here to work at St. Thomas Law School over a decade ago. I just think it's interesting, the people that got positioned to be here in Minnesota. I think that it's divine. The people that were on the scene at the time that Brother George Floyd was murdered, as you all watched the trial, I think it's divine that Stephen Jackson called George Floyd his twin and really helped to bring a lot of national attention very early on to what happened. And so I often tell people, it's so sad that Brother George Floyd and now Dante Wright have had to be sacrificial lambs, right? But what I do know is that all of this was super divine.
Yeah. I think I want to also set the tone by saying that the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, the way in which we are positioned in the world is to be a space, number one, that reflects on the history of the civil rights movement, particularly in Birmingham, but and what Birmingham's impact to the civil rights movement was. But it also is a clearinghouse of civil rights history across the board, right? So that people can come here and learn about the strategies, the different faces, so many faces that we don't hear about, or names we don't hear. You can come into the Institute and those faces are illuminated, and those stories are illuminated outside of your Dr. Kings and your Rosa Parks and, those individuals. So that's one thing that the Institute is responsible for doing. The second thing that the Institute is responsible for doing, Leslie, is to create a space for continued learning and assessment of human rights policy, human rights dignity, is to have a conversation around what do we believe social justice is? What does freedom and liberation look like? And it's not that we are positioned to tell someone this is what it is. We are positioned to say, based off of historical context and based off of historical lens, here are some things that we need to grapple with. And so I think it's really important that in this moment, the BCRI, no, we don't have a political agenda other than justice. We don't have a political agenda other than complete liberation for marginalized communities. We don't have, an agenda around political, we're not on the Democratic side, we're not on the Republican side, we're not, but our job is to illuminate the conversation and to bring as much resource and knowledge about what's going on to the space, and to have courageous conversations about that. So tonight, this really is a courageous conversation that we are engaging with you on, Leslie, and we thank you so much for being a part of this. I have a couple of questions, and we received some questions earlier this week from earlier last week when we announced that we were going to do this, and so I'm going to share that. But I think the first question I'm really interested in knowing, and I know when my entire staff at the BCRI, we were getting ready to have a meeting, and we were in Birmingham, and I'm telling you, we were on pins and needles, and I mean physically shaking. People couldn't really, we couldn't. I wanted to give my whole team the day off, but I'm like, the Institute can't close on a day like that, right? And so I remember a couple of us were gathered in my office, and when they read the verdict, the emotion, just the raw emotion that I know I had to excuse myself and go outside to get fresh air. But I heard everybody take a breath and exhale it right when the verdict came out. And I'm just wondering, what was the feeling on the ground that day when that verdict was read? I know you were on site. I know that a lot of people you organized were on site. What was the thinking right before they read the verdict, and what was the response to the verdict?
Yes. So before I go into that, I just really want to tap in to something that you said. One, you all have to bring me to the Institute.
Yes.
Okay. And I do want to just acknowledge the rich history of the South, right? And what places like Birmingham, Alabama have to offer to this nation, right? When my grandparents were from the South, North Carolina, South Carolina, Houston, Texas, who migrated to Washington, D.C. in hopes of better opportunities. And I'm the product of that. And I think a lot of the time we move away from our roots and sometimes forget where we come from. And every time I go to the South, I just feel like it's a lesson, just being there in and of itself. And so I just want to thank you all for everything that you're doing at the Institute. And I can't wait to come visit.
Can't wait to have you.
So to your first question about being on the ground. Now, I remember when I heard that the verdict was in. And I think everybody was like, wait, the verdict is in this quick? So we knew it was good news. We knew it was no way that they came to a non-guilty verdict that quick. So it had to be guilty. So when I get on the scene, coincidentally, we were at the Cubs because, we're working on this community activation bus.
Right.
We went and parked the activation bus. We went in the Cubs and we met this Black man. Coincidentally, we go to the government center right after and we run into this Black man. This Black man have champagne. The verdict hasn't even been read yet. Okay, listen, the verdict had not even been read yet. And I was like, oh, you ready to celebrate? He's like, yeah, I'm ready to celebrate. He said, it's lit, and I felt that. So we started doing chants in front of the government center. We started to claim the victory in advance at the government center. The Saturday before that, I hosted a community prayer and praise event for victory right at the government center, where we brought faith leaders from all different denominations together to claim the victory in advance. And so when we heard the verdict was in, I think the collective feel on the ground was that it was going to be victory, right? The vendors started setting up. They had food out there. It was like a cookout, okay?
Wow.
It was lit even before the verdict was read. So then when the verdict was read, so this what happened. My phone started to die.
I can believe it.
So I'm like, let me charge my phone because the verdict about to come in.
Right.
As we're starting to walk to get the charger, all you hear is a crowd. It's like a roar from like a mighty lion. So we start screaming because we know guilty. Sorry for screaming in y'all ear.
No, you.
That's what it was like on the ground. Yes. It was like, oh my God, we got to turn it on so we can hear. We got to turn it on. So we turn it on, and not just guilty on one charge, not just guilty on two charges, but guilty on all charges. It was just like, thank you, God. And for me, I think I was a little numb at first because, it's just been so much. It's been so much. And I was just like, okay, well, I'm going to celebrate by going to sleep. I was like, I'm tired, okay? My moment to exhale is going to be taking a break. And then I FaceTime Steven Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see his face,
Yeah.
it brought me so much joy.
Yeah.
It brought me so much joy because, for us, George Floyd is a symbol. He is now an adopted family member for so many of us.
Yeah.
We love George Floyd. But when you talk to people like Brandon, his nephew, when you talk to Steven Jackson, when you talk to people that knew him and that really got to know his humanity, it's indescribable, like what this means for them.
Yeah.
Right. And recognizing his life and that these officers are going to be held accountable for murdering him.
Right.
And it was a beautiful moment. It was that's all I can say. It was a beautiful moment.
That I was so torn because for many of you who may not know, Leslie and I met because I came out to Minneapolis the day after, I think it was the day after George Floyd was murdered or 2 days afterwards. And we organized at that time the press conference that Steven Jackson, who, if you don't know who Steven Jackson is, Steven Jackson was the best friend of George Floyd. They looked so similar that people would call them twins. And so they called each other twins. And Steven Jackson felt like within the 24 hours that George Floyd lost his life, that the public opinion and the media was already painting this image of who George Floyd was, that he felt was contradictory to George Floyd's legacy. It was contradictory to who he was as a person. And Stephen felt like he needed to get ahead of that by organizing as many voices and political folk and activists and there was, everybody. Jamie Foxx was there. It was a lot of people who came together to say, well, before we even get into a place of demoralizing this man's character and demonizing this human, no, we're going to tell you who George Floyd was, and we're going to demand justice for him. And I remember as we were putting the program together, I'm not sure who I remember I got the call from an organizer who was from Minneapolis. Her name is Portia Carroll, and she's actually a lawyer herself, but she's not an organizer, right? She's not an activist. And she said, I had to call somebody, and she was not tapped in to even the organizing community on the ground, which, I want to get into that because people were like, well, how did they get organized so quick? And I'm like, because they were already organized. People were already doing work. What organizers sometimes needs not is somebody to come in and tell them what to do, but to come in and provide support to their platform so that it could be elevated and illuminated so they can get the resources that they need, the support that they need to continue doing the work that has already been effective prior to that moment. And that's what we sought to do when we came to Minneapolis over, basically a year ago. And so I think that, Leslie, it's important to me, to hear you say that, because I remember what the feeling was in Government Square when we actually had the first big protest, right? The police came out, all of that kind of stuff. And that was the first night I ever got gassed, by the state, and I was like, wait a minute, I wouldn't even, what I'm saying? I wasn't even here for all, we didn't know that all of that was going to occur. And so I'm thankful that you all were able to, I know we breathe for a second, over here. And, it's wonderful to know that the people on the ground felt some semblance of justice and that their work had not been in vain.
Yeah.
And so that's
it was such a celebration, and it was such a good moment. And yes, we were all mindful that the fight continues. Absolutely. And that there's so much more work to do. But, I believe that joy is revolutionary as well. And that's why a lot of my efforts have been focused on us healing as well. Because as Audre Lorde said, self-care is not self-indulgence. It's actually self-preservation, which is an act of political warfare, right? And so I'm constantly mindful of that. And just to take you back to like what I said about 2015 and how that night that Jamar Clark was being murdered, I was receiving an award and it was great. And then I woke up to the horrible news. That's kind of how I felt because, I went to sleep to George Floyd and woke up to Ma'Khia Bryant.
Right. Absolutely. Let me ask you this. I'm gonna read this because it's the way it's worded on my paper is so good. Some say that the backlash to Derek Chauvin's conviction is already here, right? That just a few hours after former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted of the murder of George Floyd, Fox News host Tucker Carlson opened his nightly program with a typical, sort of misinformation filled rant about the decision. About 96% of the racial justice uprisings that followed Floyd's murder last summer were peaceful, but he suggested that the consequences of an acquittal in this case were the reason for the guilty verdict. So basically, he was saying that people didn't truly believe that George Floyd was, or that Derek Chauvin was guilty, but they were afraid that there would be continued uprisings if the jury did not come out of that decision. Do you think that the possibility of the public uprising to a non-guilty verdict is the reason why the jury went in the direction that they did? Do you think there's any claim to that?
Let me tell you something. How I really feel, because that's all I ever know how to say. How I really feel, for real, is, in this America, in this capitalist society that we deal with, when we deal with, such inhumane systems, when we are standing on stolen ground, when I'm the descendant of enslaved Africans that were kidnapped, brought here, raped, forced into free labor, like one part of me feels like as long as the outcome is income, I don't want to talk about y'all morals because y'all have proven to me that y'all don't have any.
Oh my.
Right? So me being dependent on whether y'all did something because it was the right thing is not the conversation I want to have, because y'all never done anything because it's the right thing. Y'all didn't quote unquote free us with the 13th Amendment because it was the right thing. Y'all didn't quote unquote integrate schools because it was the right thing. Y'all are always focused on saving America. So if they did it, it wasn't for the benefit of Black people. It was for the benefit of America maintaining itself. And I do believe that that has something to do with it, right? I think that people want to believe that this nation is better than what it is, right? And for me, though, how I feel is that it can be a step in the right direction, right? What it can be, for those jurors to come together, didn't know each other ahead of time, right? And they all get the same amount of information. They're actually educated, because that's where a lot of it comes from, is ignorance. They're actually educated on everything that transpired and how it transpired. And for them to quickly come to that decisions means that something penetrated their heart.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what I want, because one of the things I say, I believe policy, laws, all of those things are important. But if we don't change the hearts and the minds of the masses, it's no hope, And so I do believe that the hearts and the minds of people were touched. And I think that it was a very important step in the right direction. It's almost like the Civil War, right? I don't think Black people are really free on American soil, right? I don't think so. I think that the 13th Amendment extended our enslavement and just made it look a little bit different. That's what I believe. However, what if we didn't get free, right? That can't be the alternative either, right? So yes, we still have a lot more work to do. Yes, we're only still free-ish, but it placed us in a better position to get a little bit more free, right? So this trial was important because if he didn't get convicted, that means that the South won. And we know the South can't win. But we also recognize that just because the North won, don't mean they did it for the right reason or that they want to see us free, right? And so for Black people watching, we have a lot more work to do. For white people and everybody in between watching, you all have even more work to do, right? Because while our freedom is at stake, your humanity and the humanity of all the rest of us is at stake.
It's such a, we have this time together. There's so many layers of conversation, because I'm like, Lord, we could just pick apart. I could take 15 things from what you just said And while, we, again, having courageous conversations means allowing people to have courageous responses to the questions that we're answering. And so as we move through this conversation, I'm hoping that people are challenged in their ways of thinking about this, and to really sit with, well, how do I feel about the current state of the way in which not just African Americans, but any marginalized community in this country is. How is this country, providing for them, taking care of them? How is it, protecting them? What does it mean to be safe in this country? Because I think that's a conversation that so many people are having, and there's a conversation that so many people don't have to have, and that in itself is sort of the divide, right? How some folk can go to bed at night and not think anything about whether or not they are going to wake up the next day, or somebody's going to rush in their house wrong and kill them in their sleep, or whatever it may be. Some people don't have to think about that, and some people think about it every single night, right? And so I think that conversation is one that we're sitting with. And one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation is because we want to also think about what is the work that we should be doing moving forward, right? I want to say there was according to a CBS U government poll, 3 in 4 Americans think that the jury reached the right verdict in the Chauvin case. A majority of those views that span across all racial, age, and partisan groups. So that means whether you was Black, white, whomever, 3 out of 4 Americans believe that, that jury reached the right verdict. And that same poll, though, suggests that more Americans agree than disagree with ideas expressed by movements like the Black Lives Matter movement for today. Now, I can tell you that just a couple of years ago, that poll was super skewed. Just a couple of months ago, that poll was super skewed. And so on the heels of this verdict, to read that 3 out of 4 Americans think that the jury reached the right verdict, and that they agree more than disagree with a lot of the ideas that are relevant to activism or to the movement for Black Lives Today. Do you think? Right now we're making sure that people know exactly what Derek Chauvin was found guilty on. It was the 2nd-degree unintentional murder, unintentional killing while committing or trying to commit certain felonies and certain acts in violation of an order for protection. 3rd-degree murder, which is unintentional killing of another through an imminently dangerous act committed with a depraved mind and without regard for human life. And then 2nd-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, and consciously takes chances of causing death or great bodily harm to another. So those are the 3 counts that Derek Chauvin was found guilty on, and those are the things that the greater American public believe he was guilty of. And so, in the fact that you just communicated that there is a lot of work for America to do as it reconciles its history with the enslavement, the impact on marginalized communities, particularly Black communities and brown communities, it is comforting, I guess you could say, or it is at least a step in the right direction to see that an overwhelming amount of Americans thought that the charge was accurate. My question is, do you think that when we move from this conversation right now, we see and we see like, okay, for one split second, we might have been all on the same page or close to being on the same page with what justice should look like. But then 6 hours, 2 hours later, if it was 2 whole hours, I'm not even sure, we heard about the killing of Ma'Khia Bryant, and we heard about another killing. And what do you think this means, right? How do people...
And Dante Wright happened.
And Dante Wright happened, right. So, actually, 6 people were killed in the 24 hours. 6 people were killed at the hand of police officers within the 24 hours after the Chauvin verdict. Now, obviously, right now, people are just calling for accountability. We haven't had a chance to. There hasn't been a full investigation of all these things yet. So we're trying, as the BCRI, we're being very careful about how we talk about those. But the fact remains that 6 people in 24 hours lost their lives to a police officer involved shooting. And so what do you think, how quickly you talk about the joy that you felt and woke up the next morning and was like, well, here we go again. I felt the same way 30 seconds after they even said, like when they said guilty, I breathed, I cried, and then 20 minutes later, I was like, all right, back to work. Because, because it's so much to do. What were you guys thinking?
Yeah, who was it that said basically like, the enslaved African, once free, stepped into the sunlight for one moment just to only realize, and step back and realize like the sun ain't really shining on us because we're not free for real. And that's kind of like the sentiment, right? And that's why I keep going back to the hearts and the minds of the masses and like really humanizing Black people and even acknowledging our humanity, right? And that it shouldn't take a video of watching over 8 minutes of Chauvin knee on the neck of George Floyd for people to wake up, right? But it does. And we have a lot, we just have so much work to do. Yeah. And I think about when Brother Dante Wright was murdered. I was in a meeting the following day, and one of our Latino brothers, he said, this gives me a better understanding of why when, I'm driving in a car with Black men or Black women, they're like, don't speed, don't run the red light, and very cautious about traffic violations because they realize that it could end up in their death, right? And so he said it took Dante Wright. And for me, I'm always like, wow, like it's surprising, but I'm also humble to the fact that we're all acknowledging and becoming more understanding and aware of things slowly but surely, right? And I think about where we were in 2012 when Trayvon Martin was murdered.
Yeah.
And my thing is all the excuses have to stop. We have to stop asking, did they have on a hoodie at night? We have to stop asking even the whole unarmed. It shouldn't matter if they're armed. If they're not holding a gun up to a police officer's head or about to shoot, because why it's such a problem is we see how officers are able to de-escalate situations. We see officers getting chased with steak knives and running from white people and disarming white people, and even how they treat, people who commit mass shootings, right? But when it comes to our Blackness, that's what criminalizes us. And don't get me started on Black women and how we are still, as Malcolm X said, the most unprotected, neglected, and disrespected people. And so the respectability politics is what we have to be cautious of. And for white people watching and for Black people watching, you have to ask yourself, do I really believe and trust Black people, or do I only trust myself in my eyes? Because that's what it really was, right? It was them having to trust their own eyes and having to see the life sucked out of Brother George Floyd for them to acknowledge his humanity. And it shouldn't take that much. And so what we have to start doing is getting to a place where we trust Black people and we trust our stories and we trust the legacy of white supremacy in this nation that shows that Black people are lynched just for being Black.
Yeah. I mean, we're situated in Birmingham. We are situated in a place where just across the street, the 16 Baptist Church, where the 4 little girls were murdered, and 2 young men, let's be clear, were also murdered as a result of that day. We're the home of the Fred Shuttlesworths, people who put their bodies on the line every single day. This is also the home of the Children's March, right? The Children's Crusade, where young people left out of schools. They were signaled through the radio with by Shelley Stewart, who is still with us to this day, in a media giant and mogul. He signaled through those stations for them to leave, and they knew that when they got caught, they were going to jail. They knew that there were risks, and they still were willing to do it because they understood that even as a high school student, a middle school student, that we're not going to get what we need, the justice that we seek, unless we do something different. And so I think that one of the things is that's important for us to think about as we move past this first verdict, or this verdict with George Floyd, is to really look at all the things that we did different, in the last 12 months. Now, I'm also thoughtful of the fact that we had a entire, and still do, had an entire COVID happening, and people were still organizing through COVID, still organizing through the impacts of those health disparities that were gleaming and glaring during that time. And people were putting their bodies on the line in so many ways last year, that I wonder if, like you said, what does that mean? We prayerfully, COVID won't always be with us. And so we will be, I don't want to say we're back to some of a normal state, but as we, are moving out of the COVID high risk area, and people are starting to come back out even more, I believe, that there's a capacity there that we didn't even see in 2020 because of COVID. And so one of the things that I'm interested in knowing, Leslie, is as we move forward, one of the things we know is that across the conservative echo chambers, right wingers and folks who support them, they have amped up this false complaint that the Chauvin guilty verdict has been a miscarriage of justice that was coerced by Black protesters. How does it feel knowing that your efforts to bring about change, our efforts to bring about change, the efforts of so many people on here, and quite frankly, just to say that it was Black protesters, I'll be very clear. Everywhere I was, it was a multi dimensional group of folk who were out there, multiracial, intergenerational. Now, Black folks were heavy, don't get me wrong. We led, and we were deep up in that thing, but there were still others who were a part of that. So the fact that it's, that they're concerned about the Black protests, that's a whole nother conversation. But how does it feel to know that your efforts to bring about change has struck so much fear? What we feel boils down to fear, potential fear with those who contend with the movement, and so much so that they're trying to call it a false claim, or that the only reason why this happened is because that there's fear that Black people will take over their neighborhoods and lash back out a certain kind of way.
Mm-hmm. And so let me give you this example. Mm-hmm. I'm a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And back in high school, I used to be on a debate team, right? And on a debate team, they always tell you, it's very important to understand your opponent, mm-hmm. and, their arguments, so that you can give a rebuttal. However, what I think is important for people to understand, and this is why I always say Black people have never been freed on American soil. I am not spending my time arguing with slave owners. No, you believe slavery is okay because you created laws that said slavery was legal, and trying to free enslaved Africans was against the law, right? This is who we're arguing with. That's this group of people. And so I am not going to entertain, watch, or argue with people who do not think that my life is even worthwhile, unless I'm working for free labor for them. Mm. And so these are people who this system was created to protect. And now they are arguing it is broken because they see a white man not protected. These are the people who feel like, oh, Emmett Till didn't deserve justice. Oh, Trayvon Martin didn't deserve justice. Oh, Mike Brown didn't deserve justice. Oh, Sandra Bland didn't deserve justice. Oh, Breonna Taylor didn't deserve justice. Right? This is that demographic that we are dealing with. And this is why I often tell people I'm so interested in young people. I'm so excited when I see young white people and babies and little kids at protests. Right? And all people, just so we clear, because nobody's immune to white supremacy. White supremacy is not a person, right? Mm-hmm. So people who have been indoctrinated with white supremacy, that's the propaganda they're supposed to say. right? We can't be shook, shocked, or upset that a duck quacks. And so I'm not fazed. I don't watch them. I don't listen to them. We are on opposite spectrums, but I do pray for their humanity. And I do pray that they understand that this is not what little baby say is bigger than black and white.
Right.
It's a problem with the whole way of life can't change overnight, but we got to start somewhere. Might as well go ahead and start here. Right? Because we're trying to, my end goal is to help restore humanity. White supremacy has helped to dismantle humanity. So that's why we fight for Black liberation. That's why we fight against white supremacy. So anyone that's fighting to the contrary, it's like, go read a book.
Right. You know, I'm sitting here thinking about what it meant to have individuals be a part of the civil rights movement that you don't always think about. I mean, there are so many faces of, if you look at the freedom riders, if you look at some of the folk who marched from the Selma Bridge or helped folks, those are white people. You know, they were white people. They were some of them were what at that time might have been called Hispanics, now Latinx community. It was LGBT community. It's, you know, so many different facets of our community came together to create some semblance, if you will, of some semblance of civil rights. And it seems like for so long, civil rights has been on the back of the oppressed, right? How we move it is not necessarily on the back of the oppressor or the majority. It really has been on the back of the oppressed to push for civil rights. And so I think it is like you said, it is a learning that has to take place, an acceptance that has to take place, a restoration that has to take place. But I do think that there's room for so many people in the space. And so, Leslie, my question is, you know, what do you all, so now that we have this verdict in this particular case, obviously we having to deal with Dante situation immediately next. What are some of the things that you all are posed to do on the ground in Minneapolis moving forward that we in Birmingham and other places can start thinking about, even in our own practices around both healing, because we are doing the healing work, because the trauma of all of this sits differently in different communities, and we see it show up in so many different kinds of ways, right? So what are some of the next steps that you all are taking on the ground to continue showing up for communities and showing up and organizing for liberation? What can we be learning from you all right now?
100%. So it's a couple things, right? When you talk about the healing, that is really what God has put on my heart as the most important thing right now, right? Because in order to build, we must heal. And I know a lot of people, some people that might be watching, some people that might watch this on repeat. I know I'm on screen record and post some of this. And so I got to say this. I know some people might be feeling like, well, y'all are talking about the police brutality, but what about the inner city violence?
Right.
I just want people to recognize that that is something that is extremely near and dear, I think, to all of our hearts, right? And we too recognize that while it might be a little it's not as closely related, or it might seem like it's a stretch, this too is a product of white supremacy. This too is a product of poverty. This too is a product of trauma, right?
Yeah.
And so as we're going through all of these things, helping our young people to be able to process and helping them to have resources, opportunity, hope, role models is going to be very important. You know, one of the things that I'm working on, that we're working on in collaboration with Shallow Temple International Ministries, and so many people in the community are going to be involved, is this community activation bus, right? We're transforming an RV into an activation bus that during the night is going to be used as transitional housing for young people, right? And during the day, we're going to use it as an education and engagement center, right? And you all can go on my page to find out more information about that. But that's going to be one of the ways that we educate, that we heal, that we provide resources and spaces, because wraparound services is critical.
Yeah.
hard to teach people if they're hungry. It's hard to teach people if they don't have a place to sleep, right? And so we recognize that that's very important. We'll continue because again, none of our fights are separate. It's all connected. One of the big wins of 2020, before we got this win, and I told people we ain't been losing. Actually, we ain't been getting nothing but wins. Amen.
Mhm.
But in December of 2020, we got Mayan Burrell release. And many of you may remember when national organizers or local organizers, myself included, really brought attention to Amy Klobuchar's presidency, her campaign, and really bringing that. So we're continuing to fight on these wrongful conviction cases. I would urge people that it's very important, specifically in Minnesota, why it's so important and how it connects to police brutality is that back in the early 2000s, there were a lot of gang task force units. I know there were a lot here in Minnesota, and I know they were all over the nation. And our gang task force unit was disbanded for corruption, but no one ever looked into the cases that they were involved in, right? Mayan was one of those cases. I'm actually working on another case right now that we would love national support on. We're going to be working on bringing, I don't say his name because we haven't made that public yet.
Right.
It becomes public, we would love for you all to help uplift, right? Just like we uplift the dead, we have to uplift the people that's alive. Because a lot of our brothers and sisters wrongfully got sentences, right? My son 17 years. The other brother that's in has been in for 17 years for crimes that they didn't commit. Right. So uplifting things like that is going to be important. We have our first conviction integrity unit. That was one of the systemic things that we pushed for to help more people get free. That's being held under Attorney General Keith Ellison's office. I'm a part of that board that's really organizing that. Two more things I'll tell you all. We do warrant forgiveness days here in Minnesota. This is very important. Back in 2015, the ACLU did a report that basically said young Black people, just Black people in general, but also Minnesotans in general, were getting a lot of warrants for low-level offenses like driving without a license, insurance, right? Things like what happened with Brother Dante Wright, right? And so we started having these warrant forgiveness days where they could come to a community-friendly event, have all the system people at the table, judges, people from all over. They can get their warrant wiped out and also a lot of tickets wiped out, right? I think that this is a model that can be replicated all over the nation. And it's one way for us to lessen our interaction with police officers. And one of the things I would love to see is that the warrants never get issued in the first place, right? For us to figure out a systemic way to say, hey, this makes no sense to get them a warrant because it's already an attack on poverty, right? And the last thing that I will say is that we're working on a lot of policy pushes on the state level and the local level. We've been pushing a post board, which is an entity that handles the licenses when it comes to police officers. They handle the training. We recognize that they're a body that can push for a lot of things on their own. And so one of the policies that got pushed is that if white officers or officers in general are found to be held or connected to white terrorist organizations, their license will be revoked. Right. That was very important. We're working with Chief Arredondo to figure out ways that we can reduce these interactions based on, these pretext stops that really they shouldn't be getting stopped for in the first place. I can go on and on and on. There's so much work to do. But the last thing I would just urge people is don't forget about the connection with the education system and the prison systems and the police systems, because I believe that our young people are really being indoctrinated and enslaved and really pipeline into these systems from there.
Well, first of all, let me just sit with a moment because that was a lot that you just said, Leslie, in terms of next steps. We just lifted up the information about the activation bus, which I think is really important for people to know. One of the things that the Institute has really been committed to and trying to think about, Leslie, which is why I think that this activation bus is a good idea, is that just kind of like with church, we always question, like, what does church look like outside of the walls? Everybody not coming in, to your facility, and everybody's not comfortable. So sometimes you got to take the goodness that you have, the resources that you have, and show up in people's community in a real way. Y'all trying to have an activation bus in Minneapolis. I'm trying to have a BCRI activation bus so that we can take some of the information that we have and show up, in the community, and let them engage with us in a place where they feel more comfortable and more safe. And then ultimately maybe they will come to the institute for to learn more and to engage with other things that are in there. But sometimes you have to step outside of your comfort zone, provide a resource, do something that shows people that
We
you are.
should collab because I want
Yeah,
activations buses in all
yeah.
50 states.
I love it. I love it. So we will certainly be thinking through that. But I want to lift up what you said, because when I asked you about next steps, you said what I truly believe is important, and what I think the BCRI stands for, and that is looking at the holistic person and what they need, and how this system impacts the holistic community, right? So it's not just how do we hold police accountable, it's how do we change the systems that allow for the infraction to happen in the first place? How do we deal with economic stability? How do we deal with disparity in education and healthcare, which lead to ignorance and unhealthy outcomes, right? Like, how do we, all of these things are a part of what happened to George Floyd. A lack in certain systems, a lack in certain opportunities, a lack in certain humanity that led to a George Floyd. So how do we address these things across the board? What is a collective way of thinking about how we get free, and how we allow communities to change the material conditions of their own communities, and not have to wait for every single thing to happen at the hands of government and at the hands of politics? And I think I love what I heard. I heard you say, okay, what we're first doing is we're creating this safe space where people can engage, and we can train them and deal with their immediate needs. If they're homeless, if they're hungry, if they're whatever. One of my favorite quotes, and it really informs my own organizing work and the way in which I look at this. And I like to say it's by a leader that was also to some degree controversial, but Mahatma Gandhi. He said that there are folks who are so hungry, God can only appear to them in the form of bread. And I really thought about that, and it sat with me, because I wonder, then what does bread have to look like, right? So sometimes bread is literal food. Sometimes it may be, we got to get this person a job, because another brilliant mind said that nothing stops a bullet like a gun, right? Like, there's so many things that we have to look at. And so when I heard you say, well, the first thing we're going to do, Joanna, and we're thinking about is how do we get to where people are, provide resources both on issues, how to organize, but then are there some actual needs and basic, human needs that people need that we can address? And then I heard you say we're also looking at the policy around policing and how people are being, what they're being exposed to in terms of whether or not their licensing can be updated. Now, the city of Birmingham just released the current mayor. Mayor Woodfin, he just created a police accountability task force, which has community members sitting on this board and now reviewing the actions of police officers and saying, this is an issue. That's not something we've had. So kudos, to the mayor for sitting down with, and I think it took them a year of sitting down with community leaders and different individuals and law enforcement to come up with this idea. And we're going to see, you know what I mean? Like, it's a first step. It may not be a cure-all, but it's a first step. And so I hear you saying that. And then I heard you say, we're going to continue to look at the systemic things that have created space. So when you talk about, it's not just about what happens when somebody is killed. It's about what about the people who are currently in the system that have been, that are there unfairly, and those kinds of things. And so you're looking at how do we revisit some of those things and right those wrongs. And so I just want the audience to know that of all the things that Leslie has communicated about the work that they're doing on the ground in Minneapolis, what I heard was so many different inroads for people to get involved, for people to find their space in the movement there, in the fight for human rights there. And so in all of these places, you may not see yourself as being the person that's going to be on the front line, protesting. You may see yourself as a researcher. You may see yourself as somebody who can provide hot meals. You may see yourself as someone who can, help educate people on the history of things, or on the policy and how we could potentially change the policy. The point is, there are so many ways for us to address the fight for civil rights in our communities, and for human dignity across our communities. And you can find a way. There's room for all of us in those strategies that Leslie talked about. And so, sis, as always, I want to, as a individual, I will always show up for our communities and show up for leaders like yours. It was important to me. We could have had a whole bunch of different people on here, but I said I would really like to have somebody who is aligned with both the grassroots and the grass tops, right? Keith Ellison, he did an immaculate job in this trial, but you also know the man that had the champagne, who was ready to to celebrate. And that's important for us to understand, that all of that is important, and that our leaders have to be well-rounded to see all of those people in between the grass tops and the grassroots. And so thank you so much for what you do. My last question, and before I give you my last question, is there anything else you want to share with us about anything else you want to share with us before
I want to, if people are looking at Don't Complain, Activate, yes, still, amen, go to leslieredmond.com to find all things Don't Complain, Activate. But I really, as I just was listening to you, I'm just so excited for the potential collaboration. One of the things, we bought 100 home learning kits from NICCAT. It's called the Network for the Development of Children of African Descent. And they work not only with students in Sankofa programs, but they have parent power programs. And basically they created these home learning kits so that our families could learn their history, could learn education, could learn literacy, could learn communication through these books, right? And we're going to be giving them out on the bus. And I was just thinking about the Institute and all of the wisdom and history and knowledge that you all have, and how that information will be so valuable on these activation buses. So my brain is just going crazy with ideas and how we could collaborate.
Yes, I think it's important to know that the Institute has a legacy program and a program called BCAP. And these two are our longest lasting, most effective outreach programs, particularly for youth and young adults. One is for middle school. I think it is for middle school and like K5 through middle school, and then the other is for high school students, and it helps them. They're a part of these programs, and they are in spaces with folk from all different kinds of schools and all of that, and they're learning about the history. They're having to do public projects. They're having to problem solve together, and once they graduate from those classes and those courses, they then become the face of the Institute for several years, and they're the ones leading the work and leading the tours and a lot of that. So it is very important. We love to think about a potential partnership to maybe create a legacy Minneapolis, or a legacy with program with Don't Complain, Activate.
Yes.
And so I would be certain our education director, his name over our education programs, his name is Charles. He is an incredible historian himself, would love to be that. And Mr. Barry, as well as Miss Michelle, they are doing incredible work, as well as Jordan in that department. And I will make sure that I connect you all together on that. I think that will be great. And so my last thing, this has been so enriching. I hope that everybody who's been listening, I'm always my political mind, because I know I have a political background, it always goes to, Lord, if somebody chimed in at this one point, they probably think we all over the whatever. But here's the responsibility to learn and to get a complete picture of something. It's not always just on us as those who are putting the information out. It's on those who are seeking the information to seek. So I suggest that anybody who just got on in the last 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, take a time and go back and listen to the whole conversation so that you can get a full understanding of what we've been talking about today. I also want to remind people that, again, the BCRI is, it is a nonpartisan 501c3. So we do not we're not lifting up one political party or one political agenda over the other. What we are here to do is to lift up the work of liberation and to lift up those who are on the front lines and those who are in the middle of seeking justice on behalf of individuals in our community, and to provide them with a space to tell their stories, and for us to have those courageous conversations as needed. And so, Leslie, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. The last question I will ask you is this. The decision in the Chauvin trial was heard all over the world. You know that I was getting calls from Ghana, West Africa, everywhere. And public reactions came from many influential leaders, people who were in opposition to the movement. It came from celebrities. It came from, just random people on the ground. I'm interested. Has there been one response that resonated with you or inspired you the most? I know you said Stephen, when you talked to Stephen Jackson afterwards, that really moved you, and that may be your thing. But has there been any response, positively or negatively, that has really informed the next set of, the way you're going to continue to move forward?
I ran into, so this is not after the verdict. This was actually before. But I ran into two young, beautiful little Black boys who were skating with their skateboards at the park. And they didn't have on a mask. So I gave both of them a Don't Complain, Activate mask. And I asked them, how were they feeling with everything, with the trial going on and everything. And they said, well, I don't know how I'm feeling yet. They said, I want to see what happens with the verdict. Like, these little kids, they're only like 10 years old,
Right.
but they are watching.
Yeah.
Right. And so they wanted to see and wait and see if the verdict said their lives matter.
Yeah.
That was deep. Because I thought about all the generations that had to watch the Emmett Tills, that had to watch the Mike Brown, that had to watch the Trayvon Martins, and listen to the court tell them again and again and again that their lives didn't matter. Right? And so I just thought about those two little beautiful Black boys and how they must have felt empowered with this verdict.
Listen, I was sitting up here like, don't cry, do not cry. Because I think not only were they sitting to wait to find out if their lives mattered, a lot of us were sitting to wait and asking that question as well. And so, and I think that, as to bring this to a close, I want to thank Gina, who's our marketing director, who's been behind the scenes making sure that this comes off for you all tonight. I want to thank everyone for joining in to this important conversation with Leslie E. Redmond, the founder of Don't Complain, Activate, who has been leading so much of the organizing work on the ground in Minneapolis. And I want to say that, stepping into this role as the interim president and CEO of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, one of the things that Leslie, why I said yes to this and why I'm honored to have been asked to consider this is because when I was growing up, I had the Institute to go to ask hard questions, to learn about leaders I was not hearing about, even in the schools that I went to in a Black city, right? I had the Institute. It was there for me to break down and to build, right? And recently, we've had the Institute has had some positive things and some challenges, but what we know to be true is that it is still incredibly important. It is vital, not just to the Birmingham community, but it is vital to the community, to the world in terms of having conversations, creating sacred space, making sure that we are our doors are open to allow for individuals to engage around these critical conversations. And so, Leslie, you have been one of our, you have started this program with us tonight. We're going to continue to have this series of courageous conversations. And so I just want you to know the BCRI is committed to this work. This is our way of showing up. And we're going to continue to do that. So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody.
Congratulations on your role. I believe in legacy organizations, which is why I said yes to the call to be president of the Minneapolis NAACP. And I just encourage you all to watch in that we have to be the change that we want to see, right? If something needs to be improved, we have to be the ones to don't complain, activate.
That's right. And we're going to do that work. Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you so much, Gina. And you all up in our Birmingham community and beyond. Just remember that there's still much work to do. But right now, we can do a lot as one person, but we can do so much more together. So get activated. Join up to an organization that's in your area. Become a member of the BCRI. Find out what they're doing at Don't Complain, Activate. But there is a role and a responsibility for every single person to the work of liberation. And so we stand ready to partner with you all. And we hope that you have an incredible night. Night.